Okay, I'm back after a day to this. We are talking about the McKinsey report on how to scale up carbon capture to gigaton scales. My computer is become a bit problematic because the keyboard has become sticky. So every time I push for the laser pointer, it moves a slide. But just like me, my computer is old now. I need to buy a new one, but I'll wait till this dies. Okay, so let's look at how we may need a combination of carbon capture methods to actually reach the scales we need for accomplishing net zero by 2050. It's obvious when I say combination of CCS methods will be needed. Of course it will be. Plus they will all be in play based on the economics of them and depending on who's willing to buy offsets based on which method, NBR versus TBR as we are talking about and so on. So here is a cute way to think about these as we'll see in the next slide. Rapid and large scale emissions reductions will be needed to Rapid and large-scale emission reductions will need to be coupled with concerned efforts to remove residual emissions from the atmosphere and store them durably. So you need additionality, so you need to put out additional CO2 out of the system somewhere, and it needs permanence as well, and it needs to be safe in a whole societal risk sense of safe. Understanding carbon dioxide removal solutions. We have already discussed this elsewhere, so I will just read these newish points on how the permanence is looked at along with the cost. So wetland restoration, wetland and peatland restorations are NBR, so nature-based removals. So permanence less than 100 years, cost estimated in dollars per ton of CO2 is 15 to 40 at this point. Cropland, grassland and agroforestry, again less than 100 years of storage time, 10 to $30 per ton of CO2. Restoration and afforestation. Surprisingly, this is also counted as less than 100 years because mature forests do not necessarily continue to take up additional CO2, and also you need to protect them from deforestation and degradation, and wildfires are always a big threat. The cost is at 10 to $40 per ton, but this is assuming land is available and trees are going to survive for that long, because with warming and with changes in precipitation patterns, vapor pressure deficit, wildfires, this is always tricky, right? Blue carbon management, of course, coastal ocean being used for that. This can go up to 1,000 years and they don't burn down as easily, and they provide all these additional benefits of increasing oxygen in the water habitats, protection against storms and so on and so forth. And the cost is higher, of course, $25 to $250 per ton. Biochar and bio-oil again can be as high as 1,000 years. Cost is at $90 to $220 per ton. Okay, so there are potential benefits and potential challenges in each of them. We have discussed these elsewhere in detail when we talked about carbon capture and utilization methods as a whole. We looked at the state of the CCUS methods, where we go into much more details here. For example, blue carbon management, potential benefits: improve marine ecosystems, enhance coastal resilience, as I mentioned. Potential challenges: monitoring, reporting and verification for coastal and ocean ecosystems, regulatory uncertainty in international waters, obviously. Country like India may have very long coastline, and the longest coastline I think belongs to Canada, maybe, I think, yeah. So you can see that potentially there is a lot of sites where you can put away carbon dioxide, but to ensure that the carbon dioxide is going in and staying permanent, safe, etc., requires monitoring, reporting and verification, which is not easy when you go off the land into coastal oceans. So just keep those kinds of things in mind. Looking at technology-based removals, ocean alkalinity enhancement, we have discussed in detail. This can go for more than 1,000 years. Cost 2023 is uncertain. Enhanced weathering, greater than 1,000 years, 120 to $800 per ton at this point. But depending on co-benefits, this may turn out to be economical if somebody is paying for it as an offset because it's worth it for them to emit and offset it with enhanced weathering, then it may still work. But one has to do life cycle analysis for understanding things like potential challenges, environmental and social effects of trace metals in local ecosystem, groundwater contamination, and there are some ideas of whether that will lead to soil quality changes, to methane emissions. All kinds of possibilities exist, so you have to watch out for those. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, again, more than 1,000 years potentially, 60 to $270 per ton. Direct ocean capture, greater than 1,000 years, cost is uncertain. For bioenergy BECCS, I always put a caveat. So increased demand for biomass feedstock and land can compete with water security, energy security, food prices, etc., especially for poor people. So that is always an issue. Direct air capture and storage, this is where a lot of the research is also going on, and many deployments have been made by Climeworks and so on, Iceland and many other countries. That can obviously go for more than 1,000 years based on identifying spots where the carbon dioxide directly captured from the air can be stored. Cost is high, $500 to $1,000 per ton CO2 now, per ton of CO2 right now, and there are lots of efforts to try and bring down this cost. And high water and energy usage is another impact right now or the potential challenge right now. Moving on to portfolio of CO2 removal solutions that could be required to meet climatic needs for net zero. So this is sustainable potential of CO2 removal solutions by 2050 in metric gigatons of CO2 per annum. Sustainable potential in the high and low cases are noted. So climatic need in the upper bound is 10 gigawatt per year, and we are now emitting CO2 at the order of 40 gigaton per CO2, and if you do CO2 equivalent, that'll jump up to even 50, right? So climatic need in the lower bound is 6, but right now BECCS is here at maximum of 4, DAX, direct air capture, at 5, biochar 1.2, enhanced weathering, forestry, crop and grasslands, and blue carbon. And obviously, can we somehow combine them to accomplish numbers that are going to go into what is needed at the lower bound of keeping global warming in control, let's say, or even reach the maximum? Of course, we will need to combine, not just to maximize the capture, but also you will end up combining them anyway, because not everybody will be doing the same thing, or not everybody will be doing everything. So there will be a global portfolio that will track how this is going. CO2 removal cannot substitute for reducing emissions, but could help sectors in which abating emissions can be expensive or technically prohibitive by 2030. So in this set of podcasts, I also have a podcast on how carbon capture is actually potentially a moral hazard, in the sense we will just make us burn more fossil fuels because we say, hey, anyway, we're capturing them. And it could also delay mitigation efforts, saying, well, we are already capturing, why worry about mitigation? So one has to worry about those, because the hysteresis effect, or putting it out and taking it out, even if you are doing it effectively, is not the same as not putting it out at all, because CO2 is an inert, well-mixed gas. So it will produce non-uniform impacts even when you are putting it out somewhere and taking it out somewhere else, right? So we have to worry about these. So range of emissions that could be neutralized by CO2 removal in percentages. Aviation, so we are looking here at potentially neutralized through cost competitive CDR, so maximum of $200 per metric ton, or other levers, and unabatable with technologies available today, hence requiring CDR. So aviation 42 to 52%. Logistics has a chunk of irreducible, unabatable emissions right now, but has a range of 26 to 36 as potential CDR scope. Automotive manufacturing has basically unabatable technology available technology today. That's 19 to 29%. Maritime, again, another sector that gets a lot of attention for its emissions and impacts on high clouds, contrails, global warming, etc., mining and power, right? So keep those in mind. Business leaders could be well served by gaining a foundational understanding of CDR to inform their assessment of the potential role of removals in advancing their organization's sustainability objectives and individual paths to net zero. So everybody needs to be educated or self-educate for this. It's getting very hot. It's December, end of December, but it's still pretty warm because winter has almost disappeared here in Mumbai. So mostly been living even without a fan. I never turn on the AC, but even in winter it's becoming a bit hard in the apartment. I'm on the top floor, it gets hot. Anyway, it's pleasant outside actually. Delivering 6 to 10 metric gigatons of carbon removals could create an industry worth 0.3 trillion to 1.2 trillion annually by 2050. So climatic need market size is recognized by 2050 at 0.3 to 1.2 trillion. Current market size is at 0.8 billion to 2.1 billion here, and 2030 expected market size is at 40 to 80 billion. So we're going to jump out by 2050 to this scale because we are continuing to increase emissions and no other game changer is expected to come along, making it less reliant on carbon removals. Based on expected delivery of announced CDR projects, we estimate a market size of 40 billion to 80 billion by 2030. So approaching 2050, the share of technology-based removals is estimated to ramp up, while the share of nature-based removals falls but remains substantial. So here you are NBR falling but remains substantial, TBR growing and of course is going to be substantial. NBR minimum to maximum share of CDR and TBR minimum to maximum share of CDR by 2050 in terms of percentages here. Okay, so we need both of them obviously, and co-benefits are also different for each one of them. Well-being co-benefit could be high for NBRs, for example, having greenery, forests, wetlands, peatlands, etc. Understanding CDR credit market then. A CO2 removal carbon credit is a token representing a metric ton of CO2 removed from the atmosphere. So we have a set of podcasts already on understanding carbon markets where we covered a lot of these, so I won't go into details here. This token can be sold in a carbon market in which buyers can retire credits to neutralize those emissions they cannot reduce in their own operations. So we talked about retiring those and who certifies them, SBTi and so on and so forth. Carbon markets come in a variety of forms but are generally either carbon markets used for compliance purposes or voluntary carbon markets. Nearly all CDR today is purchased through voluntary carbon markets. Compliance markets, on the other hand, provide a direct price incentive to encourage companies to reduce their own emissions and emissions in their supply chains, often through a cap and trade system that issues allowances to emitting companies. We discussed this in detail in the other set of podcasts on carbon markets. Those allowances then must be traded to stay within an overall emissions cap. So you are basically cap and trade means you are doing offset by buying permits or letting somebody else reduce your emissions. Some compliance markets allow carbon credits to be used in lieu of allowances up to a certain threshold, usually around 10%. About 23% of global emissions are currently covered by a carbon price. Both voluntary and compliance markets are likely to coexist as the market for CDR grows. So jumping ahead in fact, because remember I'm being very brief here. Delivering CO2 removals capacities for net zero will likely require 6 trillion to 16 trillion of cumulative investments by 2050, far below expected levels. We looked at this in the executive summary as well. So 2030 expected investment 100 to 400. This is required 0.5 trillion to 2 trillion, and by 2050 it's going to be 6 trillion to 16 trillion. Okay, so there is what is expected and what is required, and the difference is not trivial. Okay, so that's where governments may step in with incentivizations, and maybe you will have green bonds supporting carbon capture technology innovation and deployment, implementation, etc. Technology-based removal credit purchases exceeded delivered volumes by 10 times in 2022. Okay, comparison of volumes of technology-based removals credit purchases and in-year CO2 removal delivery in metric tons of gigaton CO2 from BECCS, DAX, biochar and other TBRs. So 2020 purchase was less than 0.1. This is in volumes. 2021 jumped a little, but 2022 is quite high. BECCS is a big part of that here. That's TBR. 2020 delivered was only 0.22. So what does it say? Technology-based removal credit purchases exceeded delivered volumes by 10 times. So this was delivered and this was purchased. Okay, so similarly 2021 and 2022. So that's a 10x difference over there. So we are still lagging in this sense. Suppliers will likely capture 70 to 80% of value in this industry, with traders likely capturing more value over time as the market grows. So we talked about this also in the executive summary. So market revenues by value chains, we looked at advisory, validation, credit, financiers and traders up to 2050 in the low and high removal requirements for NBR and TBR, and this is share of suppliers. So this is market value, market revenues by value chain segment, and this is supplier revenues. So here you are going with blue carbon, cropland and grassland, forestry, other TBR, biochar, DAX and BECCS. We have looked at these before, so I won't go into this much, but you can see how BECCS is high here, but by 2050 it will be lower. Biochar remains similar, maybe even drops, and so you get various combinations in low and high removals. Okay, is this really that different? There are subtle differences that you can look at. Suppliers could gain the greatest share of annual revenues, up to 80% by 2050. This high share reflects the complex and costly delivery models for suppliers that would require greater spend on operation and maintenance. Many CDR solutions are constrained by resource availability and trade-offs with other climate technologies. So a wide range of available solution types could support lower average costs over time. So everybody is working on climate solutions for everything, food, water, energy, agriculture, health, transportation, infrastructure, aviation, that should come under transportation, but you know what I mean. So we have also looked at this. Technology-based removals costs are expected to decline over time, while the cost for nature-based removals will likely increase. So we talked about DAC, bioenergy, biochar, blue carbon, forestry and cropland and grassland. So you can see that NBRs typically go up, whereas this one is going down in terms of the cost. This is the levelized cost in dollars per metric tons of CO2. So DAC is going down, bioenergy is going down a little bit, biochar going down, but here you have forestry and cropland, grassland going up. Lowering the barriers to scaling CDR. Scaling CO2 removal to deliver net zero removal volumes is a challenging endeavor fraught with complexity and nuance. Indeed, the risks and challenges facing the industry have been documented at length. This chapter considers those challenges broadly, framing them in terms of the industry's need for the following. What are the needs? Stronger buyer incentives. Improved transparency of standards, practices and services. Clear public sector signals that this is not just a compliance but is going to be regulated in some ways, I guess. Lower cost approaches and greater capacity to deliver at scale. So it's lab scale to low technology readiness level to high technology readiness to actual deployment and demonstration of CDR at scale will be critical. Given the cross-cutting challenges facing the CDR industry, it seems unlikely that focusing on singular initiatives would be enough to create the collaborative environment needed for CDR to scale. Bold collective action in the near term can help deliver CDR's promise in the long term. Let's just close with potential early mover advantages. So there will be early movers, and they bet based on new technology, especially new investments in risky areas, based on what they see as advantages. Of course, there may be tangible long-term benefits, including strategic and competitive advantages available to those who engage in critical near-term efforts to scale the CO2 removal industry. This chapter explores these potential benefits by stakeholder group. I'm not going to go into those details, but you can read another blurb here on this topic. Investors could build market-leading capabilities. The value pools assessment in this report shows that investors could realize 20 billion to 100 billion in CDR market revenues by 2050. Investors that engage early could build their reputation and relationships to position themselves as market leaders in the future industry. Proactive investors could, for example, build CDR-focused business units to build relationships with early suppliers, standard setters, regulators, and associated services such as insurance. Building these relationships and helping to fund early players could establish an investor as a go-to funder of CDR initiatives, positioning them ahead of the competitors and helping them unlock significant revenue opportunities once the market matures. This sounds familiar because we read some of this in the first part of this in the executive summary. Okay, so this is the end of this brief summary of the McKinsey report that I just got. I keep tracking these and I take the information from anywhere. These are not typically peer reviewed in that sense, but this is important, so can't wait for peer review. Plus these are companies in the market, they sell products, so if customers are buying them, then it has value, then we need to learn about them. So this was McKinsey Sustainability's report on carbon removals, how to scale a new gigaton industry. That's how I would read it if I became a newsreader. Okay, see you in the next topic.